childhood, I don't think I had a very clear idea on what I wanted to be. So I remember there was a phase when I wanted to be a photographer. Then there was a time when I wanted to boy's dream, be a fighter pilot. So all kinds of notions growing up. But I think by the time I was 15, 16, it was clear to me that I wanted to try to get into IITs. So that was, I would say, the first time I had a goal in my life when I was 15 years old, 16 years old. And the goal was, to try to get into an IIT. At that point of time, I had not thought about, what I'm going to do with my life post engineering. Once at IIT, I think that's probably the first time when I felt that somewhere down the road in my career, entrepreneurship is worth considering. I remember one of the alumni events that had happened where I was a volunteer. I ended up bumping into and talking to a couple of alumni who had done very well for themselves in the Silicon Valley, starting their own companies. And I spoke about the challenges and the journey of starting one's own company with them. And at the end of that conversation, you're basically left with, I'll say, encouragement and also this view that regular people start companies. It's not very people who are not very different from you, right? So I think there are many nuggets like this through my time at IIT. I remember one of my professors was the head of the department of electrical engineering. Um, he'd mentioned it a couple of times to me that you should start your own company. You will do well. You have the knack for entrepreneurship. I don't know why he said it and what he saw, but yeah. So I think there were some small instances like this. B plan competition. I remember I participated in one of them, and we stood third in the country um, amongst many colleges. So there was, I think, just the nature of IIT and the system of IIT is very entrepreneurial. Students do everything on their own, from managing the hostels to managing academics to managing sports, health, cultural activities. IIT is very entrepreneurial university, I would say. Students have it's a very large say in how the university is run, probably more than any other university globally. And I think it does create a entrepreneurial mindset and a bend of mind. Even then, I would say when I was graduating from IIT, it wasn't like I felt that, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. Then I went to IIM Ahmedabad after IIT Kanpur. I think at IIM Ahmedabad, this was the first time I started to seriously think about entrepreneurship. I remember in my interview with BCG, which was my first employer, when I was asked to join BCG, I said that I want to be an entrepreneur 3 years down the road, and BCG will give me the right launch pad to be an entrepreneur in terms of just the global exposure, the structured thinking, problem solving. Come 2011, when I graduated from IIM Ahmedabad and joined BCG, um, I think that's where it started a period of about 2 years, I would say, where I started to talk about ideas and different types of companies that can get created with my now co-founder Varun. Varun and I had gone to IIT together, um, and we were good friends at IIT. We were batchmates, wingmates. So lots of shared history and shared camaraderie there. And I started to talk to him about like what could we do together. Um, and that conversation in its entirety would have lasted about 2 years before we finally took the decision to get the wheels moving on starting our own company. So from 2011 to 2013, I would say this was the phase of, you know, just conversations, warming up to the idea of doing our own thing. And then come 2013, is when we started to get the wheels moving, started to think about an idea, eventually left BCG, and got started. We should differentiate between convincing them versus them agreeing to the decision. So I think my parents did not think it was the right thing to do, but they were also mature enough to say that it wasn't their place to take that decision for me. So they told me that they felt that I was not being smart, and I was not being wise rather in making this decision. But at the same time, I think they were mature enough to acknowledge that their worldview is limited, and it is possible that my worldview is broader, given my exposure, and therefore, even in when they mentioned this to me, that they don't think it's a great idea to start my own company. In the same breath, they mentioned saying, "That said, it's up to you to do what you want to do, and you should, follow your instinct and follow your judgment." And that has pretty much been the way they have been, I would say, with me for most of their life. Less prescriptive, more laying down the options, telling me what they think is right or wrong, but then letting me decide what's in my best interest. And I think that was the case for uh, the choice to go to engineering school, which engineering you know college, whether I should do a job or do an MBA, what type of job, marriage, all of these things have been decisions which, in my life at least, I have taken. And of course, my parents have been there to counsel me, and I always think of their counsel as important. But at the same time, it's one data point in many. It's an important data point, but it's not the only data point. For most entrepreneurs, actually, like if you're going to take such an important plunge, this is not even like if your parents can, if you have to convince your parents, and that's one of the top things amongst many things that needs to be done, then anyways you shouldn't start out. You're not cut off for it. None of them, yes, it is true that they none of them come from an entrepreneurial background. Um, but that's also India, right? Like India is waking up to real entrepreneurship. Um, you know, my parents joined the workforce in the 70s and the early 80s. So this was pre-liberalization era, and consequently, the number of jobs back then which were available to them were fewer. Society was structured a different way. Government service and government jobs were considered um, to be safe, secure, high quality. uh, and they went through that as one generation, right? So that their kids don't have to necessarily go. I mean, government jobs still considered for a certain strata of society in India as the best thing that could ever happen, right, to them. But many of us were very fortunate to be born in an India that was beyond the shackles of licensed Raj. So we were born in a liberalized India, um, and we were born, in an India where our parents gave us wings, right? They gave us education, they gave us um, imagination, and India gave us opportunity. And that education, imagination, and opportunity, like it can come together if you have the wings to create beautiful things, right? Even if my father had all the education and his father gave him all the imagination, uh, India didn't have opportunity when he was entering the workforce, not, at least not as much, right? It's not to say that great entrepreneurs did not emerge in India. Brad Murthy is my father's age, and he built Infosys in that era. So outliers will create greatness regardless of the environment, right? But we can't rely on outliers to build a great country. We have to, we have to create an environment where you don't have to be an outlier to succeed. And that wasn't necessarily true in my dad's generation, but it is true for this generation. Today, if you are, and then, graduate, or sometimes not even a graduate, just a 12th pass, and you have the right ambition, you have the right mindset, you have the right thought process. You can create. Look at Ritesh and what he's created with oil. It's the greatest example, right, of what is possible in India of today. So yeah, I think all of that came together. For most entrepreneurs, the first idea is generally not going to be the successful idea. It's almost like a rite of passage to be able to get over, your first idea. So I think some are lucky and some get it right. We were not. So, there was an idea in an adjacent space that Varun and I were toying with for a few months. The specifics on the idea are not very important. I think what is important is that it was visible and evident to us a few months into that company that this was not going to be successful. And it wasn't the kind of company that we had set out to create, which was just a large, highly impactful company. This was going to be, at best, a small lifestyle company. And there's nothing wrong in building a small business or a lifestyle business, but every entrepreneur has to be very clear about what is the reason they are starting. Is the reason that they are starting out because they want to work for themselves? Is the reason that they're starting out because they want to make a lot of money? Is the reason that they're starting out because they want to create a very large company, very large impact and outcome? All of us have different reasons. For us, the reason was first and foremost large impact, large company, large output. Large being the key operative word there, right? Global impact, very, very large company, creates, touches millions of lives. Um, yeah, eventually becomes a publicly listed, publicly traded company, becomes an institution onto itself. That was the core motivation. That was 80%. And then, of course, we wanted to, in the process, create wealth for all our stakeholders and for ourselves. That wasn't going to happen with the first company. That realization was what took us time. Um, I think in the few months that we spent on that idea, we never questioned this core view that is this going to be a large outcome until we did. And when we did, it then became clear to us that it was not. And there were telltale signs around us to have to question, but we kept delaying the questioning. And anyways, it was it's not possible to not read the writing on the wall after a point. So finally, we did read it, and then it was clear to us that this wasn't going to be a great outcome, and so we closed the company. And it might seem like it was a very difficult decision to take, and um, a very difficult decision to um, bounce back from. And make no mistake about it, it was a difficult decision, but it wasn't very difficult to take. Because for us, like the reason we were taking that decision was because we thought that we wanted to build something even bigger, even more impactful. So this wasn't cutting it, and consequently, the decision seemed straightforward, and the decision was then taken, and the bounce back was, I mean, there was nothing to bounce back on. The decision was taken to build something larger. So, you kind of almost felt liberated that you were no longer tied down by something which, even in the best case scenario, would be small, right? So, I think that was like it wasn't like we spent a lot of time agonizing with that decision. It happened, and then we moved on. And then we took time to arrive at the decision to pursue urban company. That took time after that because now we were once bitten, twice shy. So we almost spent a few months just arriving at the decision to pursue urban company. Probably spent far too much time, debating it. Probably because we realized the demerits of jumping into something too quickly the first time around. So we spent at least 3 to 4 months, looking for different ideas, doing pilots in the market, talking to suppliers, talking to customers, researching ideas across the world, and being more deliberate and more thought through in our second startup. And that's when that's at that point of time, my third co-founder, Raghav, also joined us. He had shut down his own company, Buggy.in. And so the three of us basically started to brainstorm on what could we do together. And that brainstorming and market research and supplier discussions, customer discussions, global global internet landscaping, all of that led to us finally zeroing in on the idea of Urban Company, which, as you know, back then was called Urban Clan.
Urban Club. Yes.
Move on. Nobody's going to remember your failed startup anyway.
Correct.
If it succeeds, then that's the only thing that people remember. Otherwise, nobody's going to remember. So what societal pressure is? If at all there's societal pressure, it's only when you become successful. Right. Then there's some societal pressure on how should you behave yourself, and what do you represent, and your views will be looked at with a magnifying glass. Like if you're a small company, nobody knows about you.
True.
Nobody except you cares about it. So if it's failed, move on, because nobody else cares.
Right.
I think we tend to overthink what other people will say in India. The reality is nobody cares. So this was way back in 2014. And we'd been basically agonizing over the idea of Urban Company, Urban Club. And we finally took put it all together on a piece of paper, in a PowerPoint presentation, as consultants can often do, and took it to him. And we walked him through all slides. He's like, great. And then the presentation ended, and the only feedback he was giving us was great. So we looked at him almost like, he's going to tell us something. He's like, this looks great. When you were starting, and we were like, we don't know whether this is the right idea, and should we start here, or like we don't like you're almost looking for that validation. Ho gaya enough research. Like, should we just get started, right? So he's like, boss, this is like, what are you waiting for? Like, itna research to humne kabhi nahi kiya tha, right? The amount that you guys have done before starting Snapdeal. So just go for it. And that was like the point, I think, that when we said, oh, okay, so let's just go for it now. Sometimes you need that small push. I don't even think Rohit may have consciously realized that he was, giving us that push. But sometimes, as a founding group, because this is the first time you're doing something, you're not very clear on, should we look at other ideas? Should we, research this a bit more? So that external validation helps there. It just gives you that push to say, start with your times. Right? And Rohit was not the only person. I remember there were others before him as well. Not on this specific idea. I think Rohit was the first person on this idea who said, get started. I remember even when we were looking at starting our own company, there was a period of time when we met a couple of people and we said, how should we think about starting, our own company? And the answer was, start. What is there to think, right? Like, just start. Just put a stake in the ground somewhere and start. Right? And I think that really helped. I think most entrepreneurs are this way, right? Like agonizing, over-analyzing people don't make the best entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs have the ability, great entrepreneurs, in my opinion, have the ability to marry good business judgment, sound business logic, analysis, intelligence with like strong courage, fearlessness, right? And I think that's the essence. That's why all of us are not entrepreneurs, because there's a certain amount of fearlessness that is needed to go down that uncharted path. Like the first time we had investor conversations was in the second company.
Okay.
Urban Company. I think investor conversations. Investors are looking to back entrepreneurs who believe themselves, who are pursuing large opportunities and are pursuing it with vision, conviction, boldness, and who are ready to give multiple years of their life, 7, 8, 10 years of their life at least, to building something truly large, right? So I think that's what investors are looking for. And many times I get asked this question, what should you do to convince investors? And I think the answer is just build a good company. Like investors don't need to be convinced. If you are building a good company that can become a large, truly impactful company, then investors and capital will chase you. And if you're not, then you will chase capital and investors. So I think the focus should always be on the fundamentals, which is building a good company for the long haul. And then it's a function of cycles and capital, and sometimes in booming cycles it'll be easy for you to raise capital, and sometimes in down cycles it may not be as straightforward. But at the end of the day, it's the fundamentals that matter. See, obviously, if you have raised capital for some other idea and you want to pivot that idea to something else, it is very important as a founder to carry your investors along, right? This is not going to be something that you will never encounter in your company. Almost every founder will encounter this because every idea pivots. Right? And as an investor, most good investors also know this. They've been through many companies. They know that ideas change, ideas pivot. Some of the best companies did not start off, in the same avatar as they are today. If you look at Slack, Slack was a gaming company, and the chat tool that gamers used to use on one of their games became so interesting that they morphed it into Slack. So, and the investor who had invested in the gaming company, needless to say, has made a killing. So, sometimes investors are also very open to pivoting and trying out different things. But as a founder, it's your responsibility to explain, it's your fiduciary responsibility to explain to them and try to take them along. And generally, like if you are coming from first principles, if there are certain trends you're seeing in the market or you have certain conviction, like investors should be ready to back you. And in case they don't, then you have to align with them, and you have to convince them. And as I said, one of your roles as a founder is constant convincing. It's never going to get over. So your teams, your co-founders, investors, so you can't shy away from that. Like I don't think you can say it's my way or the highway. I don't think that works, right? Founders, this goes back to a different topic where some people say I want to be a founder because I want to work for myself. I think that freedom gets taken away from you. You don't actually work for yourself. You work for a wide array of stakeholders, and that's very important to constantly remember. No founder works for himself. Right? Over a period of time, founders work for investors. They work for employees. They work for they work for other shareholders. They work for suppliers. They work for customers more than anything else. Right? So as a founder, you work for many people. Therefore, your ability to convince many people, sell your vision to them, get them on board is almost, I would say, critical to your long-term success.